It was the kind of night that seemed ordinary on the surface. Quiet halls, the soft hum of fluorescent lights, the rhythmic beeping of heart monitors echoing down sterile corridors. But deep inside a military hospital just outside Washington, D.C., something extraordinary was about to unfold. No press, no advance notice. Just a single moment that would ripple across the lives of wounded heroes and ultimately shift the heart of a nation. When former President Donald Trump arrived at the hospital unannounced in the middle of the night, no one knew why. But what he did next, without cameras, without speeches, would leave a mark far deeper than any policy ever could. And when he comes face to face with a soldier who has lost everything, what will happen when empathy meets brokenness? Before we begin, if stories of real impact and human courage inspire you, help us reach our goal of 1,000 subscribers. Hit that subscribe button right now and join our growing community that believes in hope, healing, and honor. The black SUVs rolled to a silent stop at the hospital's rear entrance. Their engines cut off almost in unison, and for a moment, everything was still. Then, the door opened and out stepped Donald Trump, flanked by two quiet, alert Secret Service agents. But there was no fanfare, no waving. Just a man walking with quiet purpose. Inside, the overnight staff barely noticed at first. Late-night government visits weren't unheard of. But when word spread that it was Trump, and that he had come alone, unannounced, whispers moved quickly through the halls. Dr. Robert Reynolds, the hospital's chief, hurried forward, uncertain how to receive the former president. "Mr. President," he started, unsure if protocol should be followed. Trump simply raised his hand. "I'm not here for politics," he said. "Take me to the soldiers." That was it. No formalities. No photo ops. Just that. They moved together down the long main corridor, the echo of their footsteps the only sound besides the occasional low beep of machines. It was the hour when most of the world sleeps, but in this place, sleep rarely came easy. Pain, recovery, and silent grief hung heavy in the air. They passed rows of recovery rooms, each holding men and women who had sacrificed more than most could ever imagine. Some bore visible scars. Others had lost limbs, futures, and family. But nearly all carried the weight of something deeper, the feeling of being forgotten. A young nurse, Emily, stood just outside one of the rooms. She'd seen politicians walk through before, shaking hands, posing for photos, offering rehearsed lines about bravery. But this felt different. Trump wasn't making a speech. He was looking for someone. He stopped in front of room 112. The name on the plate read, Private James Carter. Trump stood quietly at the doorway for a moment. Inside, a young man stared at the ceiling, his face pale, eyes unfocused. James had lost both his legs in combat. But that wasn't all. He'd lost his fiancée. His friends had stopped coming around. And with every passing day, the silence around him had grown louder. Trump stepped inside and didn't wait for permission. James didn't even turn his head. "You don't have to pretend to care," he muttered. Instead of replying, Trump pulled a chair close and sat down. He didn't interrupt. He didn't change the subject. He just said, "Tell me your story." There was a pause. James blinked slowly. No one had asked him that in months. And something about the way Trump said it, quiet, personal, made him speak. He talked about the explosion, the pain, the endless hospital days. He talked about the people who disappeared after the injury, about the dreams he had before the war, and the hopelessness that took their place. Trump listened, not as a former president, not as a leader, but as a man. After a long silence, Trump finally asked, "Do you feel like your service meant nothing?" James clenched his jaw. "Sometimes, yeah." Trump nodded slowly. "That's a damn shame," he said, "because you're a hero, and this country should never forget that." Then came something James never expected. Trump placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "You're not alone. I won't let you be." For a moment, James didn't speak. But in his eyes, something flickered, a fragile ember of belief, that maybe this time someone meant it. In the hallway, Nurse Emily had watched from a distance. She'd seen James at his lowest, refusing therapy, refusing hope. But now, she was witnessing something shift, something real. She stepped forward. "Mr. President," she said softly, "there are others like him. Soldiers who feel invisible. Some who haven't spoken to anyone in weeks." Trump turned to her, his expression calm, but sharp with purpose. "Then let's see them," he said. From a single room to a quiet revolution, the night was far from over. In the next part, Trump will meet a veteran whose grief runs deeper than wounds, and whose story has never been told. But when sorrow and legacy collide, what will Trump do to keep a fallen soldier's memory alive? And if this story is touching you already, let us know in the comments. What city are you watching from? We'd love to see just how far this message of compassion can travel. Some wounds are visible. Others live deep in the soul, hidden behind years of silence and stoic expressions. As Donald Trump followed Nurse Emily deeper into the hospital ward, the air seemed heavier. The lighting dimmed. These were the rooms for the most critical cases, the ones even doctors struggled to face some days. Emily walked ahead, stopping in front of a single closed door, room 207. She paused before speaking. "He hasn't said a word in weeks," she said quietly. "Not to staff, not even to other patients. He lost more than his health, Mr. President." Trump nodded once. "Let's meet him." Inside the room, an older man sat in a wheelchair, his back turned toward the door, eyes fixed on the small window. Beyond it, the stars shone faintly in the night sky. His name was Sergeant William Reynolds. He had served his country with pride, raised a son who followed in his footsteps, and then lost everything in a single moment of war. When Trump entered, William didn't turn around. "Another visitor here to pity me," he said, his voice hoarse but firm. Trump didn't flinch. No pity, just respect. That got William's attention. Slowly, he turned his head, revealing a face lined with age, grief, and exhaustion. "Respect for what?" he asked bitterly. "For being too broken to serve?" Trump took a seat across from him and looked him directly in the eye. "For giving everything," he said, "and for raising a son who did the same." William froze. "What do you know about my son?" "Lieutenant Jason Reynolds," Trump said softly. "Saved his unit. Died in the process. They called him a hero for a day. Then the world moved on." William's voice caught in his throat. No one had said Jason's name in years. Not like that. Not with weight. Not with truth. "How do you know about him?" he whispered. Trump leaned forward. "I read his file. And I read your letters. You wrote to the Pentagon. You wrote to Congress. You wanted him to be remembered." William's hand trembled as he gripped the armrest of his chair. "I got one medal, one letter, and then nothing," he said. "They buried my son and buried his legacy." Trump didn't speak immediately. He looked down for a moment, his jaw tense. "I won't forget him," Trump finally said. "And I'll make sure this country doesn't either." William's hardened features cracked. A tear welled in the corner of his eye, but didn't fall. "You can't bring him back," he muttered. "No," Trump said, "but I can make sure no father, no family, ever feels forgotten again." For a long moment, the two men sat in silence. Then William whispered, almost to himself, "Maybe it's not too late." Outside the door, Emily pressed her hand to her chest. She had never seen Sergeant Reynolds open up. Not once. He had built walls around his heart after Jason's death. But somehow, in that moment, something had shifted. Trump stood and turned to Emily. "I need a list," he said. "Every fallen soldier whose family is still waiting for support. Every veteran in this hospital who's been overlooked." Emily blinked. I don't think we even have that kind of file." "Then we start one," Trump said, "right now." And so began something the hospital staff had never seen before. Donald Trump, once President of the United States, sat down at a desk in the corner of the nurses' station. No fanfare. No orders barked. Just him, a pen, and a notebook. He asked questions, took names, listened to doctors. He didn't just want data, he wanted stories. He called support agencies in the middle of the night, left voicemails, sent emails, mobilized people with the kind of urgency that couldn't be faked. To many of the staff, it felt surreal. Politicians usually stayed just long enough for the photos. But Trump wasn't looking for press. He was looking for people. And somewhere in that quiet movement, hope began to stir. In the next part, A single moment in the ICU changes everything. When a young boy holding a teddy bear sees his father clinging to life. What does Trump do when faced with a child's quiet grief and a father's final battle? And how does he respond when the boy's future hangs in the balance? If this story has moved you so far, take a second to hit the subscribe button. It helps us share more stories that matter. Stories of sacrifice, compassion, and quiet courage. Just outside the ICU, the hallway was hushed, dimly lit by overhead bulbs that cast soft shadows on the floor. There, on a bench far too large for a small frame, sat a little boy clutching a worn-out teddy bear. His eyes were red, cheeks stained with dried tears. He didn't fidget. He didn't speak. He just waited. Trump noticed him as he walked past. Something about the boy's stillness, the weight in his gaze, made him stop. "What's your name, champ?" Trump asked, kneeling to the boy's level. The boy hesitated before answering. "Michael." Standing a few feet behind, a woman stepped forward. Her voice cracked as she spoke. "His father is Captain Rodriguez. He's in critical condition. We don't know if he'll make it." Trump looked at the closed ICU door, then back at Michael. He placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Your dad's a fighter," he said gently. "And fighters don't give up." Michael nodded, but his grip on the teddy bear tightened. Trump stood, looked at the mother, and said nothing else. He simply walked into the ICU. Inside, Captain Rodriguez lay still, hooked up to a web of machines and monitors. The beeping of the heart monitor was steady but faint. His body looked fragile. He hadn't moved in days. Trump pulled up a chair and sat beside him. The room was cold, quiet. He leaned in close and spoke softly. "Your son is waiting for you," he said. "You've given everything for this country, and now it's our turn to give something back." For a moment, nothing changed. Then a flicker. Rodriguez's eyelids trembled. A single tear rolled down his cheek. A nurse gasped from the doorway. "He hasn't moved in nearly a week," she whispered. Trump reached out and gently patted the soldier's hand. "Hang in there. You're not done yet." When he stepped back into the hallway, Michael was still sitting on the bench. Trump walked over to his mother and handed her a sealed envelope. "Open this when you're ready," he said. She looked at it, confused but nodded. Later that night, long after Trump had left, she unfolded the letter. Her hands trembled as she read the words, handwritten in ink. It wasn't a formal memo. It was personal. Trump had written about her husband's sacrifice, his gratitude, and his admiration for their family strength. But at the bottom was something else, something she never expected. A full scholarship for Michael, and financial support to help their family through whatever came next. She pressed the letter to her chest and wept. Back at the White House, Trump didn't sleep. He couldn't. The names, the faces, the stories, they weren't fading. If anything, they were getting louder. He picked up the phone. He called lawmakers, advisors, military officials. Not to posture, not to debate, but to act. He started drafting new initiatives, expanding veteran health care, funding mental health programs, creating full scholarships for the children of fallen soldiers. The next morning, when his team arrived, they found him at his desk, still in the same suit. "We need action," Trump said, holding up the pages. These men and women gave everything. "Now it's our turn." His staff scrambled. The usual morning briefings were pushed aside. The priority had changed. Meanwhile, word of Trump's midnight visit spread. Not through the news, but through whispers. Veterans texted one another. Families began receiving unexpected calls from support agencies. Soldiers who had once felt forgotten were being seen again. When a reporter asked him later about the quiet changes in military funding, Trump offered only one sentence. "It's the right thing to do." In the next part, an unexpected letter from a nurse reaches the White House. And what follows is not just another signature. It's a nationwide shift that begins with a single act of recognition. But will these efforts be enough to keep the momentum alive? If you believe in stories that uplift and inspire, take a moment to share this video. And if you haven't yet, hit subscribe. It helps us tell stories the world needs to hear. Back at the hospital, the mood had begun to shift. There was no announcement, no dramatic change, but you could feel it. The nurses moved with a little more energy. The soldiers spoke a little more. Even the silence in the halls didn't feel quite so heavy. Emily, the young nurse who had first approached Trump that night, stood at the nurse's station reviewing charts. But her mind wasn't on paperwork. It was on everything she had seen. She had watched Private James Carter, a man once buried in silence, begin to ask for therapy again. She had seen Sergeant William Reynolds accept visits from others for the first time in years. She had seen Captain Rodriguez blink back to life, defying every medical prediction. And all of it had started with a single visit. One night, one man who showed up not for cameras, but for them. So she did something she never thought she'd do. She wrote a letter. In her small on-call room, Emily sat at a desk, the hospital still humming quietly outside her door. She poured her thoughts onto the page. How much had changed in just days, how patients had come alive again, how families were being reunited. She didn't know if it would ever reach him. After all, he was the former president of the United States. But she sealed it, addressed it to the White House, and sent it off anyway. Then, she forgot about it. Until a few weeks later, when a formal-looking envelope arrived with a White House seal. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a handwritten note. Emily, it began, the real heroes are people like you. The ones who never stop fighting for these soldiers, even when no one's watching. Thank you for what you do. You inspire more than you know. Donald J. Trump. But there was more. Enclosed was a sign bill. One that would allocate immediate funding for improved conditions across military hospitals nationwide. It wasn't a promise. It wasn't a plan. It was a law. Emily sat at her desk, staring at the document. She couldn't believe it. What had begun as a moment of compassion had become policy. A ripple that started with a single soldier was now sweeping across the entire country. And no one was talking about it on the news. But she didn't need headlines. She had seen the truth. Months later, something extraordinary happened. A private event was held at the White House. No cameras, no press, just veterans from across the country, invited quietly, personally. Among them were names that had once been file numbers. Forgotten, overlooked. Now they were honored guests. Sergeant William Reynolds stood proudly in the East Room, a hand resting on his cane. As Trump approached, the older man extended a shaky hand. You kept your promise, he said. Trump nodded solemnly. So did you. Nearby, Private James Carter sat taller in his wheelchair than anyone had ever seen him. He wore a jacket with a small gold pin on the lapel, the symbol of a new program he had founded for veterans battling PTSD. I'm alive because of that night, James said quietly. Because you listened. Trump didn't say anything. He just patted James's shoulder. Sometimes the most powerful moments didn't need words. That night, back at the hospital, Emily smiled as she walked past the therapy room. James was there, talking to a group of new patients, laughing, sharing, living. What had begun as a lonely vigil had become a movement. And it wasn't just about Trump. It was about what he had awakened in them, in all of them. The belief that they still mattered. In the next part, James takes his story to the next level, transforming his pain into purpose. A national movement begins, and even the media can't ignore it. But when attention returns, will they twist the truth or help carry the message forward? If this story has touched your heart, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. It helps us see just how far these stories of hope and healing can reach. What began as a moment of healing inside a hospital room soon spilled out into the world. Private James Carter, once consumed by silence and hopelessness, had found his voice again. And more than that, he had found purpose. With support from fellow veterans and medical staff, James launched a small support circle right there in the hospital. At first, it was just 4 men, then 8, then 12. They shared stories, losses, victories. They listened to each other in ways no civilian could. Word began to spread, and suddenly, veterans from other cities were asking to join. Zoom calls started. Meetings were held in VFW halls. What had started in a hospital room was becoming a national movement. And James never forgot how it began. He made me believe I wasn't worthless, he told a small local news crew when they finally caught wind of the story. That's why I'm still here. Reporters, intrigued by the quiet momentum of this grassroots community, began digging. But instead of scandal, they found substance. Instead of politics, they found people. Veterans who had been lost in the system were getting calls, support, counseling. Their families were receiving the help they had begged for. And it all pointed back to that one night, a midnight visit that had never been publicized. Eventually, the story broke, but not in the way anyone expected. There were no flashy headlines, no partisan attacks, just a headline that read, "A soldier's story sparked a national movement, and a president listened." In interviews, James stayed humble. He gave credit to his fellow veterans, to Nurse Emily, to the staff who never gave up on them. But one name always came up. He didn't come here for votes, James said. He came because he cared. And I don't care what anyone says. Sometimes, that's all it takes to start something bigger than yourself. The ripple continued. Veteran suicide rates in participating communities began to decline. New therapy programs emerged. Families were reunited. Hospitals once underfunded began receiving new supplies, equipment, and staff. And through it all, Trump remained mostly silent. He never tweeted about it, never called a press conference. But behind the scenes, he kept working. He continued approving initiatives, writing letters, calling families. A year later, he returned to the hospital. This time it wasn't quiet. Staff stood at attention. Nurses gathered in the hallways. And the veterans, those who could stand, did. Those in wheelchairs saluted the best they could. James waited near the entrance, now wearing a jacket with the National Veterans Outreach emblem sewn on the shoulder. He looked stronger, more alive. He smiled as Trump approached. "You came back," James said. Trump smiled. "Told you I wouldn't forget." They walked the halls together. In room 112, a new patient lay where James once had. This time, James was the one sitting at his bedside, offering words of hope. In room 207, Sergeant William Reynolds now led writing workshops for veterans processing grief. He walked with a cane now, not just to steady his body, but to lead others. And in the ICU, Captain Rodriguez was not only recovered, he was back on duty, helping oversee recovery programs for injured soldiers. As Trump prepared to leave, Emily stood by the doors, eyes shining. "You didn't just visit," she said. "You changed lives." Trump paused. "They changed mine too." He looked back at the hallway one more time. The place that had once felt heavy now carried something else, something lighter. As he turned to leave, Sergeant Reynolds slowly raised his hand in a salute. One by one, every veteran followed, even those whose arms trembled to lift. The staff stood in silence. It wasn't about politics. It wasn't about fame. It was about something deeper: honor, sacrifice, and the promise that no one would be left behind. In the final part, we'll reflect on the lessons from this journey, what this story means for us today, and how small acts of compassion can become the seeds of lasting change. Stick around for a powerful conclusion that will stay with you long after the video ends. If you've made it this far, you're part of something special. Help us grow this message. Hit that subscribe button now and join our mission to keep stories like this alive. Time passed, but the legacy of that night never faded. What began as a quiet visit in the dead of night had grown into something no one could have predicted. A nationwide shift in how wounded soldiers were treated, remembered, and supported. And behind it all wasn't a grand announcement or a media blitz. It was a man who listened when no one else would. In the months that followed, change continued to unfold across the country. Hospitals were upgraded. Support programs for veterans expanded. Scholarships were awarded to children of fallen heroes. And most importantly, veterans who had once been buried in silence were now stepping into the light, together. Emily, still working in the same hospital, often walked the halls and smiled when she saw familiar faces smiling back. Men who once refused to speak now joked with each other. Soldiers who had once felt abandoned were now mentoring the next wave of patients. One afternoon, she received a framed letter in the mail, Trump's original handwritten note, mounted beside a photo of the bill he'd signed. It had come with a short inscription: "Never forget what one voice can do." She hung it in the hallway, right near the therapy room where it all began. James Carter's support group now spanned over 20 states. They held retreats, created resources, built an app where veterans could reach out to someone within seconds, no matter where they were. James never called himself a leader, but thousands did. At an event honoring their work, a veteran stepped to the mic and said, "Because of James, I'm still here. Because of that letter, my daughter's in college." And because someone showed up that night, we all started believing again. Back in D.C., Donald Trump kept a small wooden box on a shelf in his study. Inside were names, photos, notes from families. Among them was a picture of Lieutenant Jason Reynolds, the fallen son of Sergeant William. His father had sent it with a short message. "You kept your promise. Thank you for remembering him when no one else did." Trump often looked at that box when the noise of the world grew too loud. It reminded him why he did what he did. There's something powerful about showing up. Not for the cameras, not for applause, but for people. That night at the hospital didn't make headlines, but it made history in the lives of those who were there. It reminded a forgotten community that they still mattered, that their pain had not been in vain, and that someone still cared enough to listen, to act, and to remember. The greatest changes don't always come from a stage. Sometimes they come from a chair pulled up beside a hospital bed, a hand on a shoulder, a promise spoken quietly and kept long after. Here's what we've learned. Showing up is sometimes the most powerful thing you can do. Listening can save a life. A single act of kindness can echo across a nation. And no one, not even the forgotten, should ever feel truly alone. If this story has touched you, and if you believe that stories like this matter, we invite you to be part of our mission. Hit that subscribe button and help us keep these stories alive. Every voice counts. And if you want to see another powerful story of redemption and unexpected courage, click on the card that's now on your screen. We promise it's one you won't forget. Thank you for watching. Thank you for caring. And above all, thank you for remembering.